There's a church on the hill above Coldharbor. It's been locked and empty for 30 years. No minister, no congregation, ivy grown over the doors. Nobody goes up there anymore. But the bell still rings. Not often. Once or twice a year, on a still night, when there's no wind to move it and no one within half a mile of the rope. That bell gives a single toll out over the harbour. And every time it does, within a day or two, somebody in this town is dead. We don't tell that to frighten children. It's just a thing that happens here, and we've learned how to live alongside it. There's what you do when you hear the bell, and there's what you must never do. A woman named Beth Aldous forgot the difference this past autumn, and it killed her. So sit yourself down. The kettle's just gone. Let me tell you about the bell. The bell wasn't always something to be afraid of. For most of this town's life, it did a plain, useful job. When someone died, the family sent word up the hill, and whoever kept the church would climb the tower and ring the passing bell. One slow toll for every year the dead person had lived. Down in the town you'd stop what you were doing and count, and by the last toll you'd know who was gone. An old man's bell went on a long while. A child's was over in a moment. Either way, the whole town heard it at the same instant and grieved together before anyone had to knock on a single door. We used to say the dead of Coldharbor were rung home. Then the town got smaller. The young ones left and didn't come back. The old ones went into the ground one by one, with fewer hands each year to ring them there, until one autumn there weren't enough of us to keep a church at all. So we shut it, locked the doors, gave the key to the one person who still went up that way, and let the ivy have the rest. That was 30 years ago. No living hand has touched that rope since. The tower's locked, the ladder's rotten, and the door hasn't opened in a generation. Which is the whole trouble. Because the bell didn't stop. It rings less than it used to. Years can go by and you half forget. Then, some flat, windless night, when the harbour's like glass and there's not a breath to stir a leaf, the bell gives one slow toll. Just one. And everyone who hears it goes cold, because we know what it means now. It doesn't tell us someone has died. It rings a day or two before they do. It stopped being the sound of grief and became the sound of grief coming. That's the strange mercy of it. The bell still does its one job. It still rings our dead home, even with no one left to pull the rope. Only now it rings them a little early, so we have time to be ready. And so there's a custom. When you hear the bell ring itself, you go home. You keep your light burning the way we always keep our lights here. And you do not go up the hill to look. You don't climb up to count the tolls and work out who it's for. You wait and you learn it the ordinary way in the morning. You let the bell do its work and you leave it be. Most of us can manage that. It's not a hard rule to keep until it's the hardest one there is. Let me tell you about the woman it was hardest for. Beth Aldous lived in the low house against the churchyard wall, where the lane bends up toward the gate. From her kitchen sink, she looked straight out at the gravestones. Sounds a grim thing to live with, but Beth never minded. She used to say the dead made quiet neighbours, never borrowed anything, never came round late. She could make you laugh at the very thing you'd been afraid to look at. That was Beth. She was married to Sam. Sam fished the deep water off the point. The the way his father had before him. And he loved it the way you love a thing that might one day be the end of you. A year ago this winter, a squall came up faster than the glass had promised, and his boat went down off the point in the dark. They found the boat, or bits of it. They never found Sam. That's the particular cruelty of the sea over a fishing town. It doesn't give you the body. There was no Sam to carry up the hill, no grave to dig against that wall, no coffin, no laying out, none of the slow, plain things that let a person believe the worst has really happened and begin to bear it. Beth had a stone cut with his name and set in the churchyard over nothing at all. She knew in her head that Sam was gone, but her heart never got the proof it needed, so her heart kept the door open. You'd see her at that stone at odd hours, not weeping, just waiting, as if she'd half heard the gate and turned to see who it was. And there was one thing about it I didn't understand until it was too late to help her. In the old days, when a man was lost at sea, they rang the passing bell for him anyway, empty coffin or no coffin at all. It was the one rite that needed nobody. The bell would say over a whole town that he was home, so his people could stop waiting. But by the time we lost Sam, the church had been shut for 30 years. No one rang a bell for Sam Aldous. No one could. And so the one sound that might have let Beth believe her husband was truly gone was never made for him. So Beth waited. A whole year against that churchyard wall, with his name on a stone over nothing and no bell ever rung to tell her heart the truth. The neighbours watched her drift further out each month, thinner, quieter, up at all hours. And we did what a town does. Brought soup, sat with her, said the kind things, and hoped the waiting would wear itself out in time. Then, this autumn, on a still night with the harbour like glass, the bell rang. Milton Reeve heard it first. Milton's up at all hours, bad hip, worse dreams, and he was at his window near midnight when the one toll came off the hill. He knew it for what it was, and he did the right thing. He lit every lamp in his house and sat down by his door to wait for morning. And through his window, across the lane, he watched the lights come on in house after house as the sound reached them, one, then another, the whole town waking and keeping its light. All except one. Beth's house stayed dark. And then Beth's door opened. Milton said he nearly didn't believe what he was seeing. Beth came out into the cold in her nightdress. No lamp, no shawl, nothing. And she wasn't hurrying, and she wasn't afraid. She had her face turned up the hill toward the sound, the way you'd look toward someone calling your name from a long way off. And Milton understood, a half-second too late to stop it, exactly what she was thinking. She thought the bell had finally rung for Sam, a year late from a locked and empty church, but rung at last. The passing he never had. She thought something had gone up that hill in the night to ring her Sam home, and she was going up to meet him at the gate. Milton went out onto his own step and called after her. 3 times, he says. His voice went nowhere in that still air, just dropped dead at his feet. Beth never turned. She went up the lane, through the gate, and in among the stones, small and pale in the dark, with the black tower above her and no light on her anywhere. And Milton did the one thing the custom asks, and the last thing his heart wanted. He stayed on his own step, in his own light, and he did not follow her up. Because that's the rule. You keep your light, and you don't go up. Milton kept it. He hasn't forgiven himself for keeping it, and he was right to keep it. And both of those will be true about him until the day he dies. He watched her reach Sam's stone, the one over nothing. He watched her stand at it the way she'd stood 100 times in daylight. And then he watched her open her arms, because something was coming up the far side of the churchyard to meet her, up from the direction of the harbour, from the water, the way a man walks up from the shore at the end of a day's fishing. Milton couldn't see it clearly, and he has thanked God for that every night since. He could only see that it had the shape of a man, and that it was wet through, and dark, and leaving the grass dark behind it where it walked. And Beth, at the sight of it, made a sound he said he'd never heard a person make. A whole year of waiting let out at once. She was glad. She said one word, she said Sam, and she went to it with her arms open, under a bell that had gone silent the moment she passed through the gate. They found her the next morning at the foot of Sam's stone. There wasn't a mark on her. The doctor down from the county called it her heart, and wrote it kindly, and I don't doubt he believed it. She looked almost peaceful, they said. Almost. Except her arms were still held out in front of her, closed on nothing, the way you'd hold someone you were embracing. And the cold had got so deep into her overnight that it was a long while before they could bring them down. And in the wet grass, coming up from the harbour side to the place where she'd stood, there were footprints, bare ones, coming up toward her out of the dark, and none anywhere going back. I told you the bell was a kindness once. Where that kindness came from is a harder thing, and the old ones only told me because I'd stood over Beth in that churchyard and had a right to ask. Coldharbor was founded in the winter of 1698. 40 people came here that year, late in the season, with the dark already long, and they weren't ready for the cold that lives on this stretch of coast. Their stores failed. The ground froze too hard to dig. Through that winter, more of them died than lived, and the ones still standing couldn't bury their dead, because you can't cut a grave in iron ground with your hands going black at the tips. So they kept the dead in the one cold cellar that would hold them, and waited for a thaw that was slow in coming. And that winter they learned a thing this whole town is built on. The cold here isn't only weather. It gathers, and it comes to a dying person, waits at the bed, right at the edge of the last breath. Because a soul leaving a body in that killing dark is a door standing open for a moment between the warm and the cold. And the cold had learned to wait at that door and come through it, into the house, into the town, wearing whatever face would get it welcomed in. They buried more than bodies that first spring. All winter, at every deathbed, they'd been fighting the cold for their dead. So, when the thaw came, they built the church before they built proper houses for themselves. They cast a bell, hung it in the tower, and gave it one job that mattered more than any prayer. When a soul was going, the living rang the bell, and the sound of it did two things at once. It called the whole town to keep its lights and turn its warm faces toward the dying, so the door didn't open onto an empty dark. And it covered the passing itself, held the cold off the threshold for the few minutes it takes a soul to go, so the soul went out clean and the cold got nothing and had to go back up the hill to the trees and wait out the year. That was the arrangement. The porch light kept the cold from your door while you lived. The bell kept it from your soul while you died. And all of it rested on there always being someone alive to climb the hill and ring the bell. And there isn't any more. We let the church go. We locked the door on the one thing that ever really protected us, because we were tired and few, and on a bright ordinary day it looked like nothing but an old building full of dust. So now, when a soul passes in Coldharbor with no living hand to ring it home, the bell rings itself, doing the work we stopped doing, because the work still needs done, and there's no one left to do it. That toll you hear off the hill on a windless night isn't a warning the church gives you out of kindness. It's the old protection running on its own with no keeper, because we walked away and left it running. And a thing that runs with no keeper doesn't run the way it did when it was kept. I've one more thing to tell you, and it's how I know all the rest of it. Then I'll let you go home. You'll remember, if you've sat with me before, an old woman called Ada Merrow kept the first porch light on the lane, up by the trees, 40 years, and never let it go dark. I've told you her story. What I didn't tell you is that Ada was the last soul in this town who still went up to the church. She kept the key. She cut the grass off the old stones and kept the ivy back from the one window she liked. And when we were young, before we shut the place, Ada was the one they'd send for to ring the passing bell. She had the slow, steady arm for it, and the counting of it. The last few souls this town rang home in the old way, Ada rang. She was the last living hand ever to pull that rope. And when Ada died last spring, in her sleep they told us, there was no one left who could ring the bell for her. The one who had rung the whole town home reached the end of her own long life, and the rope she'd have needed was behind a door she herself had locked 30 years before. The night before we found her, I was up late by this fire. Still night, harbour like glass. And the bell rang. One toll off the hill, from a church that hadn't been opened in 30 years. I sat here, and I knew, and I did the right thing. I kept my light, and I did not go up. In the morning, the word came down the lane that old Ada had gone in the night. The bell had rung itself for the one person left who'd have known how to ring it. It rang her home, because there was no one else too. And I've thought ever since that of all the people this town has lost, Ada is the only one who'd have understood exactly what that sound was, and been glad of it, and not afraid. I went up the next morning, in daylight, always the daylight. The doors were locked, the ivy unbroken across them, nothing disturbed. I stood under a tower and looked up into the dark where the bell hangs, and I could just make out the rope hanging dead still, exactly where it's hung untouched for 30 years. No one had rung it. No one could have. And it had rung. These last few nights it's been ringing again. Twice this fortnight I've heard it. That's why I'm telling you this now, and not some easier Friday. When the bell starts up again like this, it means the cold's about its business in Coldharbor, working its slow way down the lane, the way it has since Ada's light first went dark. There'll be a grief in this town before the month is out. Someone will lose the one person they can't do without, and that someone might be you one day, wherever you are. So I'll give you the rule the way Beth Aldous should have been given it. When you hear a bell in the night that has no business ringing, and you'll know the sound everyone always does. Keep your light on, stay by your own fire, and do not go up to see who it's for. However much your heart tells you it might be ringing for the one you've been waiting for, especially then, because the night the bell rings is the very night your grief will want to climb that hill with its arms open. And that is the one night of all nights you must not. Keep your light on, sit with your own, and let the bell ring its poor souls home without you. The fire's lit again next Friday. Mind how you go.